lesson on Learning with Sterling is about how we don't have to give up our passions just to become the people that we want to be. So I wanted to kind of share this story because as I was growing up, I thought that, every time you get a new title or a new position, those new titles, those new positions, they required respect. They required authority. And, authority, the respect that comes along with it that needs to be earned, right? I can't demand respect out of my students. I can't demand respect out of my children that is earned by the love, care, and support that I provide. However, I also thought that in order to actually be a person of authority, that I needed to be a quote unquote grown up. I needed to fit what I thought every single person of authority had before. And so as I gained any title, I would hide little things, right? So when I became an RA in college, or when I was able to be a peer tutor or a TA, or even as a professor, I thought, well, everybody who was in a place of authority before that I knew, right, like my RA in college, or we didn't have TAs at my institution, but the graduate students I interacted with when I got to graduate school, or the professors I knew, they all just seemed so grown up. They all had this kind of aura about them that they had it all figured out and that they were grown-ups and that the things of childhood just didn't come with them. So I thought to myself, well, I guess I don't need to bring those things with me either. I don't need to have my favorite things from my childhood be a part of my adulthood. I'm going to grow out of it, for lack of better terms. But then as I, tried to live that way, it got actually really hard. I would be really excited about something, but feel like I couldn't talk about it. And the first instance that I actually started to change that was when I met my now husband. And we were long distance, and when we met, and by the time he came to Notre Dame, where I was, he wanted to be a part of my life. He wanted to be involved in everything in my life. And I now had this title of girlfriend. And I was like a pretty serious girlfriend, and we had talked even about marriage. I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to be a wife, I'm going to be a mom, I've got to be a grown up. And so I've got to do all the things that, I thought a grown up wife and mother did, despite the fact that I knew that my own parents did all sorts of goofy, silly things that, weren't childish per se, right? But they weren't like super serious all the time, but I thought I had to be. And so as I'm walking at Target, back in those days, you could find Pokemon cards right by the cash register. You could find it anywhere. There was always Pokemon product. And I hadn't collected Pokemon cards in a really long time. It was something I had given up when I gained the title of middle schooler. I thought, it's not for middle schoolers. And despite the fact I loved my cards, I loved the artwork on the cards, I loved the games, I loved that little world, but I thought that I was too grown up for it, because that's kind of a common thing, especially for girls in that time frame, was we were told, well, Pokemon is for one, for boys, but two, for little kids, not for big kids like middle schoolers were. And so I hadn't even touched Pokemon cards since I was probably in 5th grade, maybe even younger. But I saw them, and I knew that my husband had liked Pokemon because it just kind of came up in conversation, because we're millennials and they always come up in conversation. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, if he really wants to be part of my whole life, then I should probably let him be a part of my whole life. And so I picked up 2 packs of Pokemon cards, and I ran to the car because he was letting me just run in, and said, hey, do you want to open these with me? And so that actually started out the journey of bringing Pokemon cards back in my life, and I even use them in my classroom to this day, but I didn't at first. And I kept things like loving all sorts of video games be kind of a more personal thing with my closest friends, and mostly, I didn't talk about it with my undergraduate research students. I didn't talk about it when I was TAing. I mostly kind of kept it to myself, which again didn't make any sense because it wasn't like it was unprofessional to like video games. But I thought that if I'm going to help run this really serious research, I need to have this really serious persona. And I kept that with me. I was willing to now share those things with my husband and my closest friends, and I was willing to, you know, keep the passions that I thought were for little kids. I was willing to share them with my husband. And I think this is kind of a theme, is that as long as my husband is there and he's going to support me and be a better man, such a great man, he's going to help me be a better person, better woman, better wife, better mother, all that. And of course, better educator. Well, when I finally got to be a professor, that's when I kind of had to really make the decision. Am I going to continue being what I thought was serious and grown up, or am I going to be authentic? And this happened my third year as a professor, my second year on the tenure track. I finally got to teach my favorite class from college. I got to teach general physiology. It was my favorite class. I adored that class. It's what actually made me want to be a biologist and not a chemist, alongside doing research. And I was so excited to teach it. I designed the class the way I wanted to. It was flipped. It was with case studies. It was with, a lot of research of what I wanted the class to be. And then the class started, and I thought it was going great. I was finally a serious professor. I was teaching a rigorous upper division biology class that I thought was going to be amazing. And I thought that, because I'm teaching future doctors the physiology of their bodies, that I need to be as serious and intense as possible so they realize how important this is. But that didn't really fit who I was. And honestly, it didn't fit the class either. And it turned into the worst class I could possibly have. So by week 3, the students had started to revolt. They started to yell at each other. There was actual instances of bullying in my classroom, which I could not imagine in a college classroom. One student even called me a swear word to my face during an activity because they just didn't like me anymore. And I want to point out, I wasn't saying mean things. I was just being more intense. And I realized, once a student calls you a witch starting with a B, that you probably need to update something. You need to do something. You can't just keep sitting in it. And I was not happy. I was struggling a lot at that time. I had just had my second kid. I was dealing with postpartum depression and all of the things. And the joy of teaching was now gone because my favorite class was having the worst situation. So I needed to figure out a way to get around that. And at the time, my husband was trying to find anything to help me stay happy and help me kind of be connected to my family while dealing with postpartum depression, while dealing with my class falling apart, while dealing with other departmental problems, just the stressors of being a pre-tenure academic. And he had found the Pokemon anime, and he had decided we're going to watch the whole thing in a year. And we decided it together, but it was really driven by him. And he just turned it on. He's like, hey, let's ignore this problem for just a second, because I'm sobbing. And we were watching an episode of there's an episode where Pikachu has to decide, does he stay Pikachu or does he become Raichu? And when he's Raichu, he can be stronger, he can be more intense, he can be more serious. Or if he's Pikachu, he can be quick, he can be cute, he can be creative. And ultimately, he decides to stay as Pikachu. And that was my moment. I was sitting there and I realized I can either become that really serious professor that I wanted to be as a kid, I thought I had to be, or I could stay myself. I could be creative, I could be cute, I could be silly. And when I made that, I was like, I need to stay. I need to be Pikachu. And when I did that, I took that whole situation and I thought to myself, well, I may be Pikachu, but my students might be something else. And so I actually that night sat down and assigned a Pokemon character to every single one of my students based on what makes them a good learner. And I brought it to class, and I made them switch table groups, and I forced them into my world a little bit. Now I want to point out, I didn't like share over lots of details or anything like that. I just gave them Pokemon characters. I gave them something to hold on to. And that class changed overnight. Now, did it ever get better in such a way that all the students were happy and that they liked the class and everything went perfect? Of course not. I was an early educator. I still am an early educator. But it was a lot better. And did my colleagues like it? No. Actually, a few of my colleagues actually came to my office and told me, hey, you probably don't need to share that. But I didn't want to be this buttoned up, serious person anymore. I wanted to do serious, rigorous science, but still have fun. And ever since I made that decision, I've had more fun at work. It's way more fun when you're, dressing the way that you want to, of course, still within professional reason, when you're doing activities, when you're showing episodes of Bluey, when you're doing silly things that reinforce real learning, that reinforce the virtues and values that these students come in saying they want. It's really fun to get to be a kid alongside these kids again, because I think it's important that we don't just stay serious all the time, because life is not that serious. Life is not that big of a deal. We just need to enjoy it a little bit. And sure, I don't engage with, Pokemon and video games the same way I did as a small child, but I take it now with me as a professor and I apply it to my classrooms. I do things like evaluate student strengths with it. I show episodes with students and have them reflect on their learning and how that relates to it. I take Pokemon cards to help them find their table mates. It doesn't have to be all out there and talk about it all the time with them, but it also doesn't have to be this secret. We can just enjoy the things that we enjoyed as children as adults. They just change a little bit. And I think that's a really special thing. And I just hope that anybody who's watching this realizes that the things that you loved as a kid don't have to go away just because you quote unquote grow up. They might be the thing that changes the trajectory of your whole career.